San Francisco, 1969. Born into privilege, or so it seemed, Tucker Swanson McNear Carlson came into a world with it all: money, contacts, access. Richard, the boy's father, was a junior news anchor at local television. The family lived comfortably. Outwardly, it seemed perfect. But by the time Tucker was 6, it was all gone. One day his mother, Patricia, walked out the door and simply never returned. Not for a weekend, not for a visit. She vanished from the lives of her 2 young boys, Tucker and his brother Buckley. Then he dropped out of their lives. Much of Tucker's adult life and the rest of his childhood would be spent trying to find out why. How does a boy of 6 give meaning to abandonment? What happens when the child of privilege is faced with a rich man and the one thing that money cannot buy: the love of a mother? But how did those early wounds prepare the man who would become one of America's most watched and contentious voices? Welcome to Story Factory. I'm going to delve into the stories behind the figures, private life experiences that turn the people we think we know in the public eye into who they are. Today, we're going back to the beginning, before the bow ties, before Fox News, before the controversies and the millions of viewers. This is the story of Tucker Carlson's childhood, the family secrets that were kept quiet for decades, and the boy who grew up asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Tucker Swanson McNear Carlson. Even his name tells a story. 4 names, each representing a different piece of his complicated family puzzle. Born May 16, 1969, in San Francisco during the tail end of the 1960s, a time when America was changing, questioning everything, tearing down old structures. His father, Richard Warner Carlson, was a local news anchor with ambitions beyond the San Francisco market. Handsome, well-spoken, driven. Richard was climbing. His mother, Lisa McNear, was an artist, free-spirited, creative. Some who knew her said she never quite fit into the traditional role of wife and mother that the early 1970s still expected. The marriage was troubled from the start. Richard's career demanded structure, appearances, stability. Lisa wanted something else, something the conventional path couldn't provide. By 1976, when Tucker was just 6 years old and his brother Buckley was 5, Lisa made a decision that would define Tucker's entire life. She left. Not for a trial separation, not for a few months to clear her head. She left California entirely, moved to France, and for all practical purposes, vanished from her sons' lives. Tucker has said in interviews, decades later, that he has almost no memories of his mother. She became a ghost, a question mark, an absence that shaped everything. Richard was left to raise 2 boys alone while maintaining his career in broadcasting. It couldn't have been easy. Single fathers in the 1970s faced scrutiny, questions. But Richard had ambition, and he had connections. And soon, he had something else: Patricia Caroline Swanson. The Swanson name meant something in America. Swanson frozen foods, TV dinners, the aluminum trays that defined a generation's childhood meals. It was an empire built on convenience, on feeding post-war America. Patricia Caroline Swanson was the heiress to that fortune, and in 1979, she became Tucker's stepmother. Suddenly, Tucker Carlson wasn't just the son of a news anchor. He was connected to serious wealth. The kind of wealth that came with expectations, with social circles that opened certain doors and closed others. The family moved to La Jolla, California, one of the wealthiest communities in America, where ocean view mansions dotted the cliffs and everyone knew everyone's business. Tucker attended private schools. He wore the right clothes, went to the right parties, spent summers in the right places. But people who knew him then remember something else too. A boy who asked too many questions, who pushed back against the easy answers, who seemed, even then, to be looking for something that the privilege and the comfort couldn't provide. His relationship with his stepmother was complicated. Patricia wasn't his mother, could never be his mother, but she provided stability, structure. The Swanson money meant Tucker never had to worry about college tuition or connections or opportunities. But it also meant living under the weight of a name, a legacy, expectations about who he should become. By the time Tucker was a teenager, his father's career had taken another turn. Richard left broadcasting to work in politics and public policy, eventually becoming the director of Voice of America under Reagan, and later the U.S. ambassador to Seychelles. The Carlson family was moving in powerful circles. Washington connections, Republican establishment, the kind of world where what you said at dinner parties mattered, where discretion was valued above honesty. Tucker was sent to St. George's School, an elite boarding school in Rhode Island, the kind of place where future senators and CEOs were groomed. Beautiful campus, rigorous academics, and for Tucker, more questions. He's spoken about feeling like an outsider even there, among the children of privilege. Maybe because of his mother's absence. Maybe because something in him refused to accept the easy path that seemed laid out before him. He wasn't a perfect student. Got into trouble sometimes. Pushed boundaries. But he was smart, sharp, articulate. Teachers noticed. He had a gift for argument, for seeing through what people claimed to believe to what they actually valued. Even then, he was learning to question narratives. After St. George's, Tucker went to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He studied history, and it was at Trinity that he met Susan Andrews, the daughter of the headmaster at St. George's. They started dating, and unlike so many college romances, theirs lasted. They got married in 1991, shortly after graduation, in the school chapel where her father had presided for years. That marriage, remarkably, has endured. In a world where public figures cycle through relationships, where personal lives become tabloid fodder, Tucker and Susan have stayed together. 4 children, decades of partnership. Whatever else can be said about Tucker Carlson's life, that's stability. The thing his own childhood lacked, he built for his own family. But before the marriage, before the children, Tucker had to figure out what to do with his life. He briefly considered the CIA, actually applied. The idea of intelligence work appealed to him. Secrets, information, power. But the CIA rejected his application. Years later, Tucker would joke about it. But at the time, it must have stung. Another closed door. Another institution saying no. So he turned to journalism. His father's world in a way, but Tucker would approach it differently. He started at Policy Review, a conservative magazine, then moved to print journalism at newspapers and magazines, the Weekly Standard, Esquire, New York Magazine. He was finding his voice, sharp, provocative, willing to challenge liberal orthodoxy, yes, but also willing to criticize conservatives when he thought they were being hypocritical. This was the 1990s, before cable news became the monster it would become, before social media turned every opinion into a battleground. Tucker was learning his craft in print, where words mattered, where you had to actually construct an argument, where editors pushed back. And he was wrestling with bigger questions too, about his mother, about his childhood, about what it meant to come from privilege but feel abandoned, about having every material advantage but missing the one thing that can't be bought. In 2003, Tucker did something remarkable. He tracked down his mother. Lisa McNear had been living in France for nearly 3 decades. He went to see her, tried to understand, tried to get answers to questions he'd been carrying since he was 6 years old. The visit didn't go well. Tucker has rarely spoken about it in detail, but he's made it clear that there was no Hollywood reconciliation, no tearful reunion where everything made sense. His mother had her reasons, her perspective. But whatever she offered, it wasn't enough to heal the wound. Tucker left France still carrying the weight of that childhood abandonment. That experience, that failed attempt at closure, seems to have shaped how Tucker thinks about family, about loyalty, about the stories we tell ourselves. It's visible in his work, if you look. The distrust of elites who claim to care about the people while neglecting their own families. The skepticism of institutions that promise protection but deliver bureaucracy. The anger at systems that protect the powerful while leaving the vulnerable behind. Tucker's childhood gave him a particular lens. He grew up inside the elite, went to their schools, ate at their tables, knew their secrets. But his mother's abandonment meant he never fully belonged. He was always slightly outside, looking in with a critical eye. This is what makes Tucker Carlson different from other conservative commentators who came from money. He's not pretending to be working class, he's not hiding his privilege, but he's also not celebrating it uncritically. There's an anger in his work that feels personal, an anger at a system that he knows from the inside that gave him everything except the one thing that mattered. By the early 2000s, Tucker was ready for television. He'd made his name in print. He had the credentials. He had the connections. His father's career had opened doors. The Swanson name still meant something, and he had something else. A willingness to be confrontational, to say things other people wouldn't say. He showed up on CNN wearing bow ties. It became his signature look. Preppy, old-fashioned. Some said it made him look like a character from an Ivy League novel. But Tucker leaned into it. The bow tie became part of the persona. The conservative who looked like he'd stepped out of the 1950s, who wasn't afraid to defend traditional values even when they were deeply unfashionable. But that was just the beginning. The bow tie era was Tucker learning to perform for television, learning to translate his sharp writing into sound bites, learning to use conflict and provocation to cut through the noise. Behind all of it was the boy from La Jolla who'd spent his childhood in big houses with everything money could buy. Everything except the answer to one question. Why did his mother leave? Tucker Carlson rarely talks about his mother now. Patricia Caroline Swanson, his stepmother, died in 2011. His father, Richard, is still alive, in his 80s now, living quietly. Lisa McNear, Tucker's biological mother, lived in France until her death in 2021. Tucker did not attend her funeral. That tells you something. About wounds that don't heal. About questions that never get satisfying answers. About how the child we were shapes the adult we become, no matter how much success or fame or money we accumulate. The boy who was abandoned at 6 grew up to become a man who questions everything, who distrusts institutions, who asks uncomfortable questions about power and privilege, who built a career on being the outsider inside the system. You can agree or disagree with Tucker Carlson's politics. You can love him or hate him. But understanding where he came from, the privilege and the pain, the wealth and the wound, helps explain why he is the way he is. Why he's angry at elites even though he is one. Why he defends traditional family values with such intensity. Why he never quite fits comfortably into any category. Tucker Carlson's childhood was a study in contradictions. He had the Swanson fortune, but not his mother's love. He attended the best schools, but felt like an outsider. He had every advantage, but carried a loss that money couldn't fix. And those contradictions made him into exactly what he became: a provocateur, a questioner, a voice that refuses to accept the official story. Maybe that's the real legacy of his childhood. Not the wealth or the connections, but the wound that never quite healed. The question that was never satisfactorily answered. The mother who left and never came back. Some people spend their lives trying to prove something to an absent parent. Others spend their lives trying to understand why they were left behind. Tucker Carlson seems to have spent his life doing both. Building a family that stays together. Building a career that asks the questions nobody wants to hear. Building a public persona that protects a private pain. The 6-year-old boy in 1975 who watched his mother walk away couldn't have known that he'd grow up to be one of the most watched people in America. Couldn't have known that millions would tune in to hear his opinions. Couldn't have known that his name would become synonymous with controversy and conflict. But that boy's questions about loyalty, about family, about why the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes don't. Those questions never went away. They just got louder, got broadcast to millions, got turned into a career. This story is based on documented history, Tucker Carlson's own interviews and statements, and biographical reporting. Some dialogue and internal thoughts have been dramatized to honor the emotional truth of the events, but the core facts remain. Tucker Carlson was abandoned by his mother at age 6, raised in wealth by his father and Swanson-era stepmother, and that childhood shaped everything that came after. If this story gave you new perspective, if it reminded you that even the most public figures carry private pain, consider subscribing to Story Factory. We're here to tell the human stories behind the headlines, to show you the wounds that shape the warriors, the childhoods that created the adults we think we know. Tucker Carlson built an empire on asking questions. But the first question, the one that started everything, was asked by a 6-year-old boy who just wanted to know, why did my mother leave? He never got a good answer. So he spent his life making sure other questions didn't go unasked, making sure somebody was always pushing back against the official story, making sure the powerful had to explain themselves. That's the legacy of his childhood. Not the Swanson millions, not the elite schools, but the wound that wouldn't heal, and the boy who grew up asking why.